Evolution discards what doesn't work and keeps what does work and continues to build upon it. No mind is complete by itself. Fear is the main thing that we all need to learn how to regulate, no doubt. When somebody's telling you a story, the degree of right brain to right brain synchronicity and body synchronicity determines how much of the story you absorb. Basically, your own psychology isn't just in your own head. It's being affected and modulated by the people around you as well. It's something that exists between people, not just solo. How all you beautiful people doing out there? Well, if you're looking at us and not just listening, you get the pleasure of seeing this beautiful sign behind me here. Look at that thing. More applause. Oh, that's pretty good. But I do say so myself, and I do say so. All right. Let's get into this. Episode 20. I don't think I've even looked at the camera yet. How y'all doing? Episode 20. This is something I've wanted to do, and I was 99% sure I would incorporate it at some point. But covering a book, I know a lot of people don't have time to read books, or they don't take the time to read books. And do I enjoy reading? I enjoy reading. I don't enjoy it as much as like watching a movie or football or something, but it's enjoyable. And so I do it because I really like learning. Like getting something new in my head always makes me feel good. And so I've done it pretty much my whole life. And something I used to do back at the old Lifetime days is I was responsible for the nutritional sales growth. And so my approach was to educate the coaching staff on supplements. And so actually pretty much the only way I did that was I'd find an article talking about whatever, fish oil, protein powder, creatine, whatever was going on at the time. And, every week we had our coaches meeting or trainers meeting, and I would just go over the article and I would just highlight some points in there. I'd read it. Oh, that was cool. I'd learn something. And then I would highlight what I learned or what I found interesting in there. And it was a great way to educate the staff, and I learned a ton along the way. So I kind of knew that when I started the podcast that this would be something I would do. I would cover a book. And a few weeks ago, probably more than a few weeks, maybe, not even know, within the past 6 weeks, I picked up a new book. I came across a book called The Development of the Unconscious. And I had posted on the Instagram there that, hey, would anybody be interested in learning about this? And so here we are in this book. We're going to go over this book. Now, originally, I thought I would just do it. Well, I posted I'd go through it chapter by chapter. And then when I was reading the book, I'm like, there's no way I can go through this chapter by chapter. But I think I'm going to go through it chapter by chapter, just leaving out a couple chapters because they're just pretty specific. And I'll talk about which ones those are. Maybe it was one. I don't remember exactly. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to do this in succession. So I'll probably cover a chapter and then do something else, or cover a couple chapters and then do something else. And we'll roll like that. So anyways, let's get into this a little bit more. Not quite into it, but get into it. So goal of this episode is to share this book because it's an amazing book. Try to simplify and condense the information down into something that makes sense to everybody because it is as technical as you can get. Yeah, pretty much. And have some fun while we're doing it, okay? Outline of topics. We've got updates. We've got before we get started. I'm making my own sound effects, Nathan. Big takeaways. And some final thoughts, okay? So we'll go through the basic updates because, I don't know, those are fun. Before we get started, I want to cover a few things before we get into it. And the main part, actually, I left out a topic here. Good thing I went through this again. We'll get into my big takeaways for the book, what I kind of got out of it, like what was like, like a light bulb or something I didn't really know, and now I have understanding around. And then we'll go to the book. So this could be a long time. This could be a long podcast. And then we'll get into some final thoughts, which I don't think that'll take too long. Usually doesn't. All right. Some updates. The Eagles. I wish I had a bird sound. That was awesome. The Eagles won the Super Bowl. I was happy to see that, to be honest. I mean, I'm not like an Eagles fan, but I'm not a Chiefs fan at all. Just got tired of watching those guys win and Mahomes is amazing and all this stuff. And I think a lot of people are getting tired of that. So it was good to see the Eagles stomp them pretty badly. I enjoyed it. The weather's been cold, and it's going to get colder next week, down into the single digits again. Another update is this amazing sign, which I couldn't even avoid. I got right into. It's over there. If you can't see it, it says Nobody Podcast with Dennis Fenrich, and it's got lights, and it looks really, really cool. I posted it on the Instagram there if you want to get a look at it. Am I through the updates already? Sign updates. Subscribers are exactly the same. Now, I made a change there again. So we're on our third. Remember, we started with a social media manager. We're trying to grow all these channels. That wasn't working. We made an adjustment to just somebody that was focused on YouTube. And, he did an okay job, but he's kind of disorganized. I had to, get him to do it, to remind him of a few things. And we got some growth, but it wasn't what I was expecting. And so we're on to our third guy. And I've got a lot of hope for this guy. He evaluated the entire channel, put it into a document, itemized things, talked about the strengths and weaknesses, and we've got a call tomorrow. So this guy is way proactive. And I'm pretty excited about it. So yeah, I think we're going to really start to push the dial on that growth in the YouTube. So subscribers are pretty much the same. And as always, submit your questions to dennis@dennisfenrich.com. Now, I do get emails in there, and I get excited, but then it's like email marketing, and I'm not excited anymore when that happens. But, so anyways, you guys could just email me and say hi. All right. Let's get into this. Okay, so this will be interesting, I think. Long time ago, in my 20s, I started reading, and I started reading to learn, and I read two books called Think and Grow Rich, and another one was called The Master Key to Riches. Now, both of these books, if you're not familiar with them, they were written by a guy named Napoleon Hill. Now, the story was that he was asked by Andrew Carnegie, not Dale Carnegie, not the How to Win Friends and Influence People guy, but Andrew Carnegie, the big steel tycoon at the time, to write a book about success. And he said, hey, you got a couple stipulations. I'll get you in contact with the most successful people in the world, because he was one of the most successful people in the world, and he was who he was running with. But also, you got to take, I don't remember what it was. He had to take a minimum of the 10 years or 20 years or whatever it was to do this thing. And so it happens, and the guy actually does it. And he writes like an 8-volume set called How to Succeed or something like that. But then later on, he condenses them down, and that's what these two books were, Think and Grow Rich and The Master Key to Riches. Now, I say all that to say this, because I got 3 quotes out of there, because at the time I was in my 20s, and he was saying these things, and I was just like, man, that's out there. But, maybe somehow it's possible. So let me read these to you, because anyways, let me just read them. So Napoleon Hill, in one of these books, I don't remember which one it was, said, no mind is complete by itself. It needs contact and association with other minds to grow and expand. The coordination of multiple minds working together towards a common goal creates a third, intangible force that can be likened to a third mind. Now, that one always jumped out to me. You're in your 20s and you read something like that, like, what is he talking about? How in the world? It seemed, based on our current science and understanding, it doesn't even seem possible, right? But man, there was just something to it that kind of just grabbed me, and it really had my attention. And the third one, every brain is a broadcasting and receiving station for the vibrations of thought. And so, I got that stuff in my head for 20 years now. And then I come across a book called The Development of the Unconscious Mind, let me make sure I get this title right. The Development of the Unconscious Mind. Yes. And he's talking about this connection that forms up between, the mother and the child, the mother and the baby, and there's this and we'll get into this, but there's this mental connection that forms up, and basically the mother ends up regulating the child's emotion. But it's not just this thing that they're thinking about. It's some form of connection, all right? And he never in the book says anything about some sort of electrokinetic or broadcasting and receiving station. He basically interprets these things to be happening through eye contact, facial expression, and it's all subconscious, right? But it's when we're looking at each other. But he does have a point in there where it's not when we're looking at each other, and I think I highlight it. But anyways, so that's one of the most fascinating things about this book, is that we're not alone. It's not just us on an island in our own heads, that our minds, through a right brain to right brain connection, it's the right brain specifically that is making this connection, and it's an emotional connection. They got to find a way to find a physical connection with it. But man, there's a connection there, and it's absolutely crazy when you read this book, and I'll cover some of the highlights. I came across this guy. His name is Dr. Allan Schore through the Huberman Lab podcast, and it's one of the best podcasts that I've seen with him. And what I'm going to do right now is read the bio on this guy so you have some idea who he is. Dr. Allan N. Schore. Oh, I'm going to read this bio. Yeah, if I get my glasses on, I am. Where are my glasses at? How do you keep your eyes young? That's what I want to know. All right, look at that. All right, so here goes his bio. Dr. Allan Schore is the author of 8 seminal volumes, including, and they list the 8 books. I'm not going to read them all. And blah, 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 the books, as well as numerous articles and chapters. His regulation theory, grounded in developmental neuroscience and developmental psychoanalysis, focuses on the origin, psychopathogenesis, and psychotherapeutic treatment of the early forming subjective implicit self. There's a lot of words in there. So psychopathogenesis, so mind, pathological, the formation of pathologies in your brain, basically. And then psychotherapeutic, is that what it is? Psychotherapeutic? Yeah. So basically then how do you form up therapy to fix those imbalances in your psychology? All right. I'm reading his bio a little bit more. His contributions appear in multiple disciplines, including developmental neuroscience, psychiatry, psychoanalysis, developmental psychology, pediatrics, attachment theory, trauma studies, behavioral biology, clinical psychology, counseling, and clinical social work. This guy's all over the place. His groundbreaking integration of neuroscience with attachment theory has led to his description as the American Bowlby, which apparently, I should have looked this up, but this Bowlby guy was another guy that was in the psychology field and just contributed massively and had, added, kind of helped everybody understand it on a whole nother level, is basically the way to say that. Continuing with emotional development as the world's leading authority on how our right hemisphere regulates emotion and processes our sense of self, and with psychoanalysis as the world's leading expert in neuropsychoanalysis. So the physiology of the nervous system and how it affects how you think. Going on, the American Psychoanalytic Association has described Dr. Schore as a monumental figure in psychoanalytic and neuropsychoanalytic studies, end quote. He has had a distinguished career on the clinical faculty of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the UCLA David Geffen School of Medicine. He has been inducted into Sigma XI, which I looked up really quick. That's been around since like 1890. The Scientific Research Honor Society. It's an honor society for scientific research. And blah, blah, blah. For a detailed list of his books and articles, please visit the publications on this page. And he's got a website if you want to check him out. It's a pretty simple website. Allan Schore, SCHORE.com. 2 ALLEN. Multiple ways to spell Allan. So that's who this guy is. He's had a huge impact. He's been doing, so his first book was written in 1995. I don't know. I tried to look up when he got into the field. Like I never found it, but I would imagine it was like in the 80s, I'm guessing, somewhere in there. But the guy's been in the field for a super long time. I've come across information that has rocked me before. When I came across fasting, that really rocked me. Like that just opened up a whole nother door of understanding when it came to how our metabolisms worked. And I got all into it, learned as much as I could, and it's fantastic. Fasting's really changed how I view our bodies. This has done the same thing for our minds. To look back to the Napoleon Hill when I was in my 20s, and him talking about this connection, this third mind forming up and all this stuff, and then to come across a book that says, yeah, that's happening, and we're taking fMRIs, and we're getting functional magnetic resonant MRI, magnetic radiation imagery? Magnetic resonance imagery? I should definitely know what MRI. We all know what MRI is. Functional is they're actually doing it and seeing as things are moving. So they can see how the brain is working while it is working. And basically he's backing that thing up. He's like, yeah, so there is some sort of connection there. And now we're going to figure out how. And most of it falls through like you're seeing and all that other stuff. But there is an example here, which I'll point out, which the mother and the child weren't even looking at each other. Let me get a drink here real quick. Where them crickets at? Nope. All right, I'm back. What if the crickets just went on and on and on? Okay, we're rolling here. So my takeaways. One of the big things I was reading early on in the book, and I was like, oh, I had never thought of that before. Therapy has shifted. So, when you think about therapy today, you hear about behavioral cognitive therapy. I had a hard work on my brain starting to slow down. BCT, that is not right. Behavioral cognitive therapy. Well, you think about therapy today, it's about kind of this left brain, conscious, and what we're going to do is, you act this way, and we're going to give you an override for that. When you perceive yourself or see yourself acting this way, you're going to think this thing. And it's going to control that behavior is somewhat effective. And that's what we think about therapy as. But that's not always what it was. When it was first originated, it actually focused more on behavior. It evolved to the 80s and the 90s and turned into more cognitive. And now, through this Allan Schore and people in this field that are on board with what he's doing and his team of researchers that are discovering these things, it's actually going to shift into more of an emotional therapy, right? How do we help you actually restructure the emotions that are guiding your behavior, right? So it started as behavior, it turned into this cognitive thing, and now it's evolved into where what it appears to be probably its final stages, but who knows? But definitely the most effective stage, which is we're going to actually help you adjust the emotions that are driving the behavior and getting to the root of what's going on. That hit me. I'm like, wow, that's crazy. I never thought about that. I always just thought it was what it was, right? But it has evolved, and it's evolved again. Attachment theory. I had a rough idea of what attachment theory was. Basically, so, a child is born and it's attached to its mother or the primary caregiver, and, it feels safe there. And then when it goes and explores, it has this range of exploratory behavior before it feels unsafe. It'll run back to the mother to get that safety and get security again. And that's kind of attachment theory. Well, he's kind of evolved it again, and he's kind of renaming this thing and calling it regulation theory. And what I mentioned previously for a little bit was that the mother is actually helping the child, the baby, regulate its emotion through this right brain to right brain connection, okay? Which is fascinating, right? Because the baby comes into the world and it just doesn't have the ability to regulate its emotion. The mother comes along, or the primary caregiver, and is able to, through eye contact and skin contact and facial expressions, to help the child regulate the unrestricted emotion that it is experiencing. And the gist of it is when a good enough, as he says often, like good enough, it doesn't have to be perfect, but when a good enough primary caregiver is doing that well or good enough, then allows for the baby to learn and to develop the capacity to regulate its own emotions, fear for the most part in the beginning. So that was super cool. Psychotherapy or therapy or having a therapist is shifting from this, or actually our own psychology is kind of shifting from this thing that exists, by ourselves within our own head into something that is actually shared. It's not intrapersonal, it's interpersonal, where it's actually something that happens between two people or more that is really when we are able to stabilize. And I don't know what I'm quite saying there. What am I saying? This is something I kind of got, but I couldn't quite articulate. So what did I write? Move from a personal perspective of a healthy psyche to a dualistic one that shapes the emotional regulation of each individual. Basically, your own psychology isn't just in your own head. It's being affected and modulated by the people around you as well. It's something that exists between people, not just solo. Yeah, that's about right. Okay. I think I covered some of this right here. Again, these are my takeaways. We haven't gotten to the book yet. We'll get to the book here in a couple more minutes. The initial relationship between infant and mother, or infant and primary caregiver, enables and it guides the emotional regulation of the infant, allowing for the development of the neural pathways needed for emotional regulation throughout life. And that's kind of what I just said, which is absolutely huge. When you see the difference in that, it's just going to reshape, especially if you're a mother with a new child. You need to be emotionally stable as best you can to help that child be emotionally stable. So get on your game, girls. Probably shouldn't have said that. All right. What other takeaways do I got? 2 major emotions that need to be regulated are fear. Oh, yeah, this was huge. All right. So this came like midway in the book. And so basically, when you're a baby, the mother or the primary caregiver, their main responsibility is to help you start to regulate your fear, right? Babies are crying because whatever, they're hungry, but also because they get scared and they need to learn how to regulate that emotion. So fear is the main thing that we all need to learn how to regulate, no doubt. And hopefully we got a good base on that from our mother or our primary caregiver. But if we didn't, we can still develop that later on, which is another big thing. But second to the fear, the next primary emotion that we need to learn how to regulate is aggression. And about the end of the second year, going into the third, the father usually takes over that role, which this is just so fascinating that you've got this developmental period that actually starts in utero and then is up to about the first 24 months. And then there's this shift, right? You learn how to regulate your fear, and then fear is still obviously learning how to do that. But then it starts to become more of an aggression thing, right? Because now you need to learn how to go out into the world. Now you're getting exploratory, and you got to learn how to not like be a jerk, right? Not how to kick and bite and scratch and do those things, but still know how to play and be aggressive and exploratory without doing it in a way that like hurts other people or is in a negative manner, right? So I just thought that was fascinating. One more big takeaway: the dyadic, which means 2. Right brain forming relationships continue throughout. Okay, and this is the final point, right? So if you've been listening to this and you're like, oh my God, I did not have a good mother, or I did not have a good environment that I grew up in, and I didn't get that solid base of development, that's fine. It doesn't ever stop. We always are able to relearn or rewire these pathways in our right brain to be able to stabilize our emotions. And a good therapist is one way to do that. They obviously need to be trained in right brain therapy, and that was one of the things I tried to do. I tried to find a resource to find a good right brain to right brain psychotherapist, I think that's what they're calling them, but I couldn't really find anything. I was on Schore's website, I did some searching, but I just couldn't find like a system to locate these people that are trained in these techniques. So yeah, I wish I could point you in the right direction, but at least you can start to understand that if you are looking for a therapist, you can find one, and we'll talk about some points in here, but find one that is basically not just giving you like reprogramming, right? They're not giving you some cognitive thing they're not trying to tell you a new way to think about it. They're trying to go through help you experience the emotion with you, and then it's fascinating what's happening. That therapist then sits with it, and he describes this multiple times, sits with you in that emotional state and then helps you regulate because your brains get connected. I know this all sounds crazy if I'm actually verbalizing this. Read the book and let you kind of rewire or reinterpret those things when they sit with you in that emotional state. And it's absolutely fascinating. The book just blew me away, and I'm glad I got an opportunity to share it with some people here. So, all right, let's go to the book. But before I do, I'll tell you the plan. I'm not sure how many episodes this is going to be. I'm not sure if I'm going to cover every chapter. So there might be some episodes in between, and that's really the plan that I got. It's going to be more by the cuff and depending on what I got going on. But, so let me do this. I'm going to read the chapter titles to you guys, and then we'll go through chapter 1. And like I said, I mean, I mentioned this once, but this is a super technical book. When I ordered the book, I assumed, I was just thinking that this was written to like general population or maybe like, an educated population, right? But people that aren't in the field, and it is not. It is written to people in the field, and so it is technical. And it took me a little bit to get going with all the new jargon, but I'll do my best to try and explain the jargon when we get to it, because I think I have a good enough understanding to understand it myself. We'll see if I have a good enough understanding to simplify it for everybody else. But I'll try and do a good job. I'll do the best I can. How about that? All right, so let's read these chapters real quick. So like I said, they're technical, so they're going to be long. Early emotional attachment, the development of the right brain, and the relational origins of the unconscious mind. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2, modern attachment theory. So he goes through modern attachment theory. Chapter 3, early interpersonal neurobiological assessment of attachment and autistic spectrum disorders. I doubt I'll cover that chapter because it's so specific to children with autism. There might be some interesting points to take out, but, talking to a very general population and most people, it might be interesting. I don't know. Maybe I'll go through it. Maybe I'll combine some of these chapters. That might be a good idea. Chapter 4, All Our Sons, the developmental neurobiology and neuroendocrinology of boys at risk. And that was really interesting because he talked about how, you've got this window of development, this initial window of development, and how boys or males their risk is actually greater because those windows of development are a little bit longer, which was just fascinating. Chapter 5, early right brain regulation and the relational origins of emotional well-being. Chapter 6, the development of the right brain across the lifespan. What's love got to do with it? And he talks about basically what I just mentioned, that your brain remains plastic. Your ability to learn these things, how to kind of rewire your right brain into for it to be better equipped to handle emotion, which is basically what we need to learn how to do, happens throughout our life. And lo and behold, it's most effectively going to happen in a state of love. Go figure. Chapter 7, playing on the right side of the brain, an interview with Allan and Schore, published in the American Journal of Play. So it just talks about how play affects right brain affectivity. Okay, now I will say this as well. So this is book 1. This is the book that talks about the development of the unconscious. And then there's a second book which is written to psychotherapists about applying the concepts in this book. And there's one of the best chapters that I've read so far out of the 2 books. I'm in it right now, and it's an interview with a lady, and it's the most simplified verbiage that he's used at all, and it is so good that I really look forward to. If I don't cover that book, I will definitely cover that because it's like I said, it's the most simplified verbiage that he's used, and he just explains things so succinctly. It's great. All right, let's go to the book, guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read passages or parts that I've highlighted. They will be full paragraphs for the most part. And so let's get into this. Chapter 1, early emotional attachment, the development of the right brain, and the relational origins of the unconscious mind. In the first paragraph, I'm like, I got to read this. Okay. In recent years, the unconscious, the central theoretical construct of psychodynamic theory, has reappeared in a new form in the scientific and clinical literatures. What did I want to clarify? Psychodynamic theory. So basically, the underlying thing of therapy is basically the unconscious, right? That's what therapy is all about, right? We know what we're conscious of. It's what are we unconscious of and how is it affecting us? All right, back to the book. Psychoanalysis has been called the scientific study of the unconscious mind. Brenner, 1980, clearly implying both that the unconscious is its definitional realm of study and that this realm is accessible to scientific analysis. Although originally closely tied to the psychoanalytic theory of repression, the construct of the unconscious is now being used across a number of psychological and neurobiological disciplines to describe essential implicit, spontaneous, rapid, and involuntary processes that act beneath levels of conscious awareness. Yet despite current significant advances in brain laterality research, many clinicians and social scientists continue to hold older and now unsupported ideas that the primitive, in quotes, nonverbal unconscious mind is a miniature of the, quotes again, more complex verbal conscious mind, and that the non-dominant right hemisphere is a lesser mirror of the dominant left hemisphere, and the non-dominant and dominant are in air quotes. So basically, what he's talking about here is the shift in psychology from an old way of thinking that the left brain, which if you don't know, super quick, super simple, the left part of your brain is more specific. It's basically thought of as being language. It's basically thought of being where you think and what you're conscious of. And the right brain was this kind of like older version of the brain that was less evolved. That is old thinking. And basically what he's saying is, that is outdated. That is not what it is. And it's been clearly shown that's not the case. And he breaks down all this stuff throughout the book. So I thought that was significant because I know there's a lot of people out there that are getting therapists, and if your therapist is acting on these old mindsets, then they're just behind, and they can help. I'm not saying don't go. I'm just saying that I don't want to be too critical. Definitely helpful. Definitely go. Definitely apply what you're learning. But if you want true lasting change and not a program, right brain to right brain psychotherapy is what you're going to be looking for. And look at, man, the information needs to get out there. And I'm glad I have an opportunity to kind of do that. So I hope you guys are enjoying this. All right, another highlight. In the following, I will offer a large body of evidence indicating that the development of the unconscious mind begins in the prenatal, perinatal, and postnatal stages of human infancy and continues across all later stages of the lifespan. So I highlighted that because it's like, this is starting in the womb, man. Like the communication, the physiological things that are going on inside your brain and your body are being affected when you're in the womb. It's just mind-blowing, like the whole thing. And it continues on and all the way throughout your entire life. Like your brain is very plastic and it's able to adapt and it just forms up and it's absolutely fascinating. I feel like a super nerd. All right, another highlight. Back to the book. This first relationship, the one with the mother, acts as a template as it permanently shapes the individual's capacity into all later emotional relationships. And this is one of the big points in the whole thing is that you get set up and that setup is going to have an impact on your entire life. And, it's too bad we can't pick our parents. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's no shot at mine. I feel like my mother did a good job. And I learned how to manage my aggression through my brothers. But I know a lot of people out there, maybe not in that good of a situation or maybe in a better situation, but it doesn't stop. Your ability to make improvements in these areas continues on throughout your entire life. But there is kind of like a setup phase. All right. Again, can't pick your parents. Back to the book. Wow, there's no way I highlighted all that. This conceptualization was the first expression of interpersonal neurobiology, a perspective of human development that enables us to understand that the structure and function of the mind and brain are shaped by experiences, especially those involving emotional relationships. To put this concisely, the self-organization of the developing brain occurs in the context of a relationship with another brain, another self. Schore, 1996, page 60. Over the past 3 decades, a huge body of interdisciplinary evidence across all mammalian species, including humans, documents the indelible, enduring impact of specifically the mother on the infant's prenatal and postnatal subcortical and cortical brain development. Schore, 1994, 2003, AB, 2012. Those are all him making his references. So what in the world did that just say? So I think you guys get most of it. Subcortical and cortical brain development. So cortical is kind of like, if you want to think about like the most later developing part, and it's the part that we're more conscious of, not 100%, but more conscious of in the thinking. So subcortical would be under that. And I think he breaks this down into 3 major phases, and there's different parts, but you think about, we evolved from the bottom up, the very primitive emotional physiological, your emotions guide your behaviors, right? But we're so used to like our behaviors being about, how I drive my car or, do I exercise? What did I eat today, right? But before all that, if you look at every other organism out there, there's no real thinking. It's like there's an emotion and that drives the behavior of the organism. If it's hungry, it needs to go eat, right? If it feels scared, it's going to either attack or hide. It doesn't make decisions. It just reacts to the emotion of the physiology. But we've added on a layer on there where we can start to override or think about or be aware of those things. And so cortical, kind of more recent thinking, more left brainish, subcortical things under that, emotions, behavior, and all that stuff. All right. Back to the book. Thus, I have continued to offer data supporting the organizing principle that the first relationship in quotes, Stern, 1977. The earliest relationship, in quotes, Brazelton and Kramer, 1990, with another human is mediated by unconscious right brain to right brain attachment communications between the mother and infant, and that this primordial bond is mediated by rapid emotional communications between the mother's right brain unconscious and the infant's emerging right brain unconscious. Schore, 94, 2003A, 2003B, and 2012. And last sentence in this paragraph right here. In other words, early affective, meaning emotions that affect you, all right? So in other words, early affective experiences during critical periods of right brain development permanently influence the development of the right lateralized psychic structures that process unconscious information. Whoo! So how you got set up in the beginning, your emotional states and how you learn to behave in those and how to process those, obviously, when you say it just makes sense. Continue on throughout your life. Your brain is forming up under these conditions, and how did it form up? Again, the beauty of all this and learning this information is, one, future generations, well, I would imagine our parenting skills will be much better, but for us now, if this is you, these things remain plastic, right? You can have emotional responses and learn how to process them better, and you actually rewire, and they've shown that you actually rewire this right brain circuitry, and it happens between good, solid, supporting relationships with stable people. Right brain to right brain communication. Like, man, it's just crazy to think we're all getting connected like that. It just blows my mind. I mean, because, when you say connected, something I used to think about, right? Like when I was a kid, you'd go out and you'd hang out with your friends, and you didn't have these distractions of these phones. And as the day went on, and then the longer and more time you spent together, you felt, and this is the word I'd always use, you felt more and more connected. You just felt like you were getting closer and closer to these people or this person that you're with, and that is exactly what is happening. It is not something that you imagine. It's not something that you think about. It is something that is happening implicitly below your consciousness in the subconscious, and it needs to happen. We need to have these things. If we don't have these kind of relationships in our lives, that's why you're seeing that's why you're seeing all these kids that are stressed out, right? They're not developing these connections. They go out and hang with their friends, and everybody's staring at their phones, right? It's not happening, right? You need this time to be with people, to connect, to help shape your emotions, how to help shape how you behave. I mean, it all makes sense when you say it. But back to the book. There's actually a picture in here. Oh, I forgot to say this, Nathan. If you get a picture of the book up, the cover up here, that'd be great for people. You probably already did that. You're smart like that. All right, back to the book. Looking. All right, here we go. What do we got? In one study of mother-infant bonding, Minagawa, 2016, performed functional near-infrared. That's not infrared. Oh, yeah, it is. All right, let me start again. Sorry. In one study of mother-infant bonding, Minagawa, 2016, performed functional near-infrared spectroscopy, hyperscanning, neuroimaging, during which mothers at rest held their sleeping 3 to 4 month old infants. This is it. This author reported the largest synchronization of the holding condition was observed to be near the anterior orbital frontal cortex for both mother and infant. So it's a specific region of the brain. As the OCF, anterior orbital frontal cortex, is known to be a significant cerebral area engaged in maternal attachment. Minagawa, Kawai, et al., 2009, Schore, 2010. So quoting, making his reference. The results may further support its role. Page 19. Note the attachment diet is communicating when the mother is at rest and infant is asleep. I didn't read that super well, but that was one of the things that super blew my mind was It wasn't just when they had eye contact, when they were looking at each other. Now, it could be through skin, it could be through breathing, it could be through heart rate, but there was still a synchronization even when the child was sleeping. What? See, your subconscious is always running. When you're asleep, you're just not conscious, but the rest of your brain is still running. You're just not conscious anymore. So our brains are running, and that mother and that infant brains were running, and they were right brain to right brain communicating. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on, man. If this stuff doesn't get you excited, you've already turned it off by now. So you're excited. So basically what this is saying is this part of the brain, this specific part of the brain, this anterior orbital frontal cortex. So anterior is front, and orbital means it's the part behind the brain, and it's part of your cortex. Of both the mother and infant were active, and they were getting a picture of this with this technique, this technology called near infrared spectroscopy, hyperscanning neuroimaging. What the heck is that? I don't know. Some crazy pictures we can take. You remember when you're watching Star Trek when you're a kid? Probably not. But they would have these things that could like look through people, no problem, like in their hand, you know? Apparently we got that now, but you just have to go someplace. Wait till you get a handheld one. You know what I'm saying? Back to the book. The mother-child context provides a prototypical, developmentally salient context where synchrony is first experienced and encoded in the brain during early sensitive periods. Feldman, 2015, AB. As mammals, our brain develops in the context of the mother-infant nursing dyad through processes of biobehavioral synchrony, the coupling of mothers and child's physiological and behavioral signals during moments of social contact. Feldman, 2012, 2016, page, here's another thing that blew me away. Page 1037. Some of these quotes was like page 1736, which, I mean, you know, I'm trying to do some blogging, and I've got like 10,000 words. I've got like 4 pages. You know what I'm saying? This guy's on like page 1700. Like, how do you know so much about something that you could write 1,700 pages about it? That was upsetting and inspiring. What is the point of me reading this right here? It's just reinforcing this whole right brain connection. And there's actually a picture in here. Can't see it. Actual picture of the neuroimaging. Fantastic. All right, back to the book. What do we got? Synchrony also operates within verbal interactions, as in conversation where both members alter their posture and fixate their gaze simultaneously. So this is talking about like this mirroring that we start to do. So the dyad, the mother infant, they start to mirror the vocal tones and also their positioning. This interactive mechanism co-creates an alignment that supports mutual understanding, what Clark and Brennan in 1991 called common ground, a shared function that correlates with synchrony at the neural level. Again, just backing up. This whole first chapter was just backing up because he just doesn't say something and then, yeah, that's a fact. It just goes on and on and on and on. A reference, it's a reference, it's a reference of people in different labs seeing the same thing, okay? So I'll continue here. Common ground. Commenting on these studies, Jasmine, et al., 2016, observed, when listening to a speaker tell a story, the listener's brain actively is synchronized with that of the storytellers, both simultaneously and at a delay, and the degree of coordination predicts understanding and alignment of mental states. What the heck? Okay, so what I just said was that when somebody's telling you a story, the degree of right brain to right brain synchronicity and body synchronicity determines how much of the story you absorb. So what is going on there? Are we like, this comes back to the Napoleon Hill thing. Is the brain a broadcasting and receiving station? I mean, what is happening here? It's unbelievable. Back to the book. And the degree of coordination predicts understanding and alignment of mental states. I'm going to stop saying the references because you guys are going to look it up and it's just breaking up the flow of this thing. Note the direct relevance of the synchronization to conversations with the therapeutic interaction, in which, among other things, the therapist processes the patient's emotional narrative and the patient processes the therapist's interpretation. So just talking about when you're sitting there with your therapist and how connected are you getting, right? Because you want to get good therapy ends up in these deeply connected states. That's where the best work is done, right? It's not like your therapist is sitting there listening to you, coming up with a strategy for you to fix your problems with some sort of plan. It's that the therapist and you are getting connected on a deeper and deeper level, and the therapist, who, he points out multiple times, is going to have their issues of their own, but hopefully they've got them worked out, are able to stay in these emotional states that are going to arise and help you work through them so you can rewire or rethink about them. It's not even think about because it's subconscious, but rewire them by seeing an example. He goes into more of this in the second book, but fascinating. Fascinating. All right, back to the book. Another imaging study now demonstrates that emotions promote social interactions by synchronizing brain activity across the individuals. In this manner, the right brain attachment dynamic continues throughout the lifespan as an unconscious mechanism that mediates the interpersonal and intrapsychic events of all relationships, especially intimate relationships. Again, going back to this is happening all the time, but it is especially prominent the more intimate the relationship is. And so if you've been with somebody for years, like that's just great. That's just a great place to be, to continue to develop the depth of that relationship. It is not something that we just verbalize and say depth. It is something that is actually physically happening, because if you think about the structures of the brain, the deeper and deeper layers are what you're getting into. So there is physical depth. It's interesting that we use the word depth because I'm sure we could just kind of sense that was going on. When you get into a deep conversation always has more emotional tone to it. That is what is making it deep. And then if you make that reference to the brain, the emotion of the brain, what is going on emotionally, is a deeper thing within your physiology, where the thinking is more of a surface thing in the cortical structures of the mind. Absolutely mind-blowing stuff. Okay, back to the book. I think we're getting close here. Let me take a look. We got a lot of work to do. Let's keep rolling. Okay, back to the book. Preverbal communication is the realm of non-consciously regulated intuitive behavior and implicit relational knowledge. Let's read that again. Preverbal communication, so before you actually can verbalize your words, is the realm of non-consciously regulated intuitive behavior and implicit relational knowledge. So it's the things you're doing behaviorally that you're not even thinking about, and how you're relating to others. Whether information is transferred or shared, which information gets across, and on which level it is understood does not necessarily depend on the sender's intention or conscious awareness. Okay, so just getting back to the point that this is subconscious, and you're sending and receiving signals without you even being aware of it, and you're responding to them without you being aware of it, which, duh. I mean, there's another book that I read it's about consciousness, and it's called The User Illusion, and there's a whole chapter in there where he breaks down consciousness on a data. Now, he doesn't do it, but this research was done back in the 60s and 70s, or through the 60s. And so basically they were trying to figure out, how much information is the brain processing, and how much of that information are actually aware of, are we conscious of? And the number that they came down to was 1,000,000 to 1. So if there was 1,000,000 bits of information being processed, we were aware of one of them consciously, which is mind-blowing that the number is that far, because you have a tendency to think of consciousness as being like everything. You think you're aware of everything, and it's like you're aware of nothing, which is, let that sit with you for a little bit there. So that's what that was pointing out. All right, back to the book. If you follow the Jocko podcast, that's what he does a lot. Back to the book. I like it. Okay, this right lateralized communication system evolves in the mother-infant attachment relationship, which shapes emotional circuits in early critical periods of right brain development that generate unconscious working models used to navigate the subjective self through the social world. I have to tell you, this guy's good, man. That was like a mouthful right there. Again, this is just reinforcing stuff we've already talked about. Thus, for better or for worse, the maternal-infant attachment relationship structuralizes the developing right brain unconscious via an implicit intergenerational transmission of resilience against or vulnerability to later psychiatric, personality, and developmental disorders. Again, starts early and it gets set up, but thank God we can adjust it. And I'm telling you, I'm not just saying it to make you feel better. Like, legit, you can have huge impact on this stuff. And if you think about what most people are suffering from, they're suffering from unregulated emotion, right? They have anxiety, which is stemmed from fear, unknown, right? They're unable to regulate those emotions in a social environment or wherever it triggers the anxiety. And so this book says, great, we understand that now, and here's how you can fix it. Pow, let's go. Let's go get some. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm... It's just what I'm saying. Get fired up. Get fired up, man. Back to the book. Just as we have a Just as we have a conscious and an unconscious mind, as well as a right and left brain, we also have two self-images. Oh, man, this was nuts. All right. We have two self-images. One is consciously maintained, and the other is almost wholly unconscious. The conscious self-image is associated with the left half of the brain in most people. However, this self-image is also subject to unconscious influences. By contrast, the unconscious self-image is maintained within the right brain mental system and is tremendously influenced by current and past experiences. The two self-images interact. Indeed, sometimes the conscious self-image is fashioned in reaction to unconscious feelings, trauma, and feared inadequacies that the person does not want to process or possess, but that nevertheless are unconsciously maintained. See, that is nuts because, again, this comes back to this laterality, this left brain, right brain thing, and that we have this kind of conscious persona, this conscious idea of who we are, but then there's this whole other consciousness which is subconscious, I should say, which is in the right brain, which is also affecting our personality and having an influence on the other one. So we're aware of one, but then there's this whole other one we're not even aware of. Whew, man. I don't know if this is too much for you, but it's coming too much for me. But I love it. Back to the book. In terms of the sequence of neurobiological maturation, note in figure 1.5 that the brain evolves in a caudal to rostral direction. Okay, so caudal front, rostral back. Think rooster tail is how I remember that. So the brain develops, what does he say? The brain evolves in a caudal to rostral direction. Am I saying that backwards? Subcortical to cortical. I am saying that backwards. Caudal is back and rostral is front. So anyways, whatever. You don't need no technical terms. I was just talking about a little bit ago. From subcortical, so underneath the cortical, the more later developing thinking part towards that cortical, with the brainstem autonomic and arousal structures maturing earliest, then the emotion processing limbic system, then the earlier maturing right hemisphere, and lastly the verbal functioning left hemisphere. That was a little harder to follow. Basically, think we evolved bottom up. We evolved you got your nerves, you got your nerves, you got your spinal nerves. What is that even called? I want to say central nervous system, but I guess that's what it is. But you got your nerves, and they come up and they go into your brainstem, and at the brainstem, you got the amygdala, and that evolves up a little bit farther, which goes into the right brain. You got these structures in your right brain, and then the right brain evolves over to the left brain. And that's how things kind of evolved up, right? Like organisms were completely emotional based. They reacted to their environment. They didn't have anything they didn't think. They just reacted what was going on. And so this whole process, this thing kind of bloomed up and evolved up out of that over millions and millions of years. I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of years, because every mammal has this. I think every organism with a brain has a left and right brain, which basically indicates that in order to operate in this world, This is the structure that has to be there, because that's what evolution does. Evolution discards what doesn't work and keeps what does work and continues to build upon it. Wow. All right. That was a lot. And he's got a picture of it here. It's fascinating. All right, guys, couple more things and we're done. Back to the book. The right brain psychotherapy. I'm going to start again. In right brain psychotherapy, the companion to this volume. Oh, okay. All right. So, like I said, there's a second book which is written. I mean, these are both written to psychotherapists, but it's written to how to specifically apply it. So, this is what he's talking about here. In right brain psychotherapy, the companion book to this volume, I discuss the importance of patient-therapist mutual regressions from higher, later evolving conscious to lower, earlier evolving unconscious levels, which we were just talking about. These synchronized mutual regressions allow the dyad to access, communicate, and regulate the early unconscious self-image of the patient, which is dominant in determining the individual's emotional well-being and mental health. I continue to assert that much of the mental health field's research overemphasizes measures of the left brain conscious self and underappreciates the power of unconscious, implicit, motivational, and emotional systems in the human experience. Schore, 2012. If you don't know implicit, just think like implied. There's explicit, which I can explain, I can verbalize, and there's implicit, which you can't verbalize it. It just happens. It's just implicit. It's just there, you know? So that's basically what implicit means. There is now agreement that affect dysregulation, so emotional dysregulation, is a fundamental mechanism of all psychiatric disorders, that right brain deficits and implicit and relational processes are the key to all personality disorders, and that all psychotherapies show a similarity in promoting affect regulation. Basically, what he's saying there is that all real improvement shows some form of getting better at regulating your emotion. He's got a picture of Freud had this kind of concept of an iceberg, and it's got a picture of consciousness. So basically, you have consciousness, you have pre-consciousness, and then the subconscious, and then the deep subconscious, and he kind of breaks that stuff down. So consciousness would be immediate awareness, explicit memories, verbal mentation. So the things that you can think about and what you're aware of. Pre-consciousness, accessible memories, so things that you could get into, but you're not conscious of right now. You've got a ton of memories like that. Nonverbal, implicit, relational knowledge, so all the things that that you just aren't conscious of when it comes to behaving. And internal working models. That's all pre-conscious. Express dysregulated emotional memories, and then the deep unconscious. Implicit procedural memory, so just how you act without even thinking about it. Disassociated emotional trauma, collective unconscious of the species, which is what? That's heavy for people. Evolutionary drives and instincts. So that's all in your deep unconscious. All right, almost there, guys. Okay, last thing to read here. At all points of the lifespan, in any heightened affective moment of mutual love, two deep unconscious systems are communicating, synchronizing, resonating, and co-regulating each other. Fall in love. And listen, if you're in love and you get a partner that, quote unquote, loses their... What you can do to help them is to not get involved with that, to love them and stay with them, but stay, and I don't mean like with them forever. I mean like in that moment, stay with that person and you stabilize your emotion. And guess what? They can see how it can be done. There's an implicit, there's a subconscious learning that is going on when you stay calm, when you love them and they're, not doing great. Let's just say that. That's what love is. That's what love is. Now you got to learn when to, it's just too far out of your skill set, but stay calm, man. Last thing, a large body of studies now demonstrate that the emotional, social right brain is centrally involved in not only affects and stress regulation, but also empathy, intuition, creativity, imagery, symbolic thought, insight, play, humor, music, compassion, morality, and love. Schore, 2012. Man, right brain is the deal. And we got to get connected to that thing. I think really early on, I talked about like one of the challenges I think we're seeing in the world is we just got disconnected from our bodies. And guess what? That right brain is the connection to your body. It's the implicit, the emotion, the feeling. And when you're getting disembodied, when you're not spending time in that part of your being and you're only up in this left brain and you're only cognitive all the time, you're going to get detached from yourself and you're going to get detached from others. And this book is providing imagery, data, scientific data showing that is the case, and we can see it happening in somebody's brain or we can see it not happening in somebody's brain. So this is like, I'm telling you, this is stuff like 30, 40 years from now, it's going to have a huge impact because that generation would have been born with this knowledge as long as it gets learned and put out into the world, which it will. All right, guys, that's it for today. This was a ton of fun. Took a minute to get going, but I was happy to be able to share this stuff with you. Next week, final thoughts. We're just going to close it out. This book rocked me, as you can tell, changed the way I think about therapy and what I look for in one. And you can find this book on Amazon. Again, it is called The Development of the Unconscious Mind. It is very technical, but if you can muddle your way through it and learn these terms, man, it'll rock your world. Next episode, special interview with a good friend of mine, Taylor Whitman. She is a type 1 diabetic, and I'm really fascinated in how she regulates that and how she handles that in her training life. So she will be next week doing an interview with her. Help us grow, like and subscribe. And as always, submit your questions to Dennis@DennisFenrich.com. All right, guys, have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.